The only thing the old bat is competent enough to do is sign the transfer papers. That's what he actually said. Loudly, too. Right outside my bedroom door, 2 weeks after the funeral. I let that phrase hang in the echoing silence of the courtroom, a stark, ugly thing exposed under the fluorescent lights. My son-in-law, Gregory, had turned a color somewhere between fine Bordeaux and purple ink. My daughter, Charlotte, had buried her face in her manicured hands. They had laughed, you see. They had actually laughed when I, Evelyn Sterling, all 76 years of sensible tweed and old lady shuffle, walked into that imposing room. Charlotte and Gregory were seated at the plaintiff's table, looking every inch the moneyed elite they aspired to be. Charlotte in a cream suit that screamed settlement, Gregory in an Italian wool that silently shouted entitled. He had even nudged his lawyer, Mr. Marcus Thorne, a man whose silver hair was too perfect and whose smile was too thin, and whispered something that made them both chuckle. I imagined it was a joke about my orthopedic shoes or my ancient leather handbag, the one Arthur gave me 30 years ago. Probably suggested I was confused and had wandered in off the street looking for the ladies' room. Let them laugh. I thought, sinking slowly into the defendant's chair, the old leather sighing beneath me. They thought they were facing an incompetent widow. They were about to learn they had cornered the lioness. Mr. Thorne, of course, was the one to speak first, his voice professionally grave as he addressed the bench. Your Honor, we are here today to protect the assets of Mr. Arthur Sterling's estate, valued at $85 million, from imminent dissipation due to the documented cognitive decline of the defendant, Mrs. Evelyn Sterling. He paused, allowing the weight of the amount and the accusation to settle. My clients, the late Mr. Sterling's only daughter and heir presumptive, are simply requesting the court grant an immediate competency evaluation and appoint a temporary conservator. The recent bizarre and financially disastrous actions taken by Mrs. Sterling, specifically regarding the newly established Cypress Hill Philanthropic Fund, speak for themselves. I watched Judge Helena Vance, a woman with iron-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing, glance down at the docket. A faint, almost imperceptible tremor ran through her jawline. I knew why. Her name, like mine, had changed since the last time we stood together in a courtroom, though I doubted anyone else in the room caught it. Mrs. Sterling, the judge said, her voice dry as parchment. You have no counsel present. Do you maintain your decision to represent yourself in this matter? I rose slowly, leaning slightly on the table, giving them all the performance they expected. I adjusted my spectacles, a small dramatic gesture. Yes, Your Honor, I do. I believe I am perfectly capable of handling this. Matter. I let the word matter trail off, making it sound vaguely like a complicated recipe or a faulty washing machine. Gregory snorted. Charlotte just shook her head, pity warring with righteous indignation. They were so confident in their narrative, a simple, sweet housewife utterly out of her depth, easy prey for a skilled litigator. They had no idea that sweet housewife was a role I'd played for 30 years, and litigator was the name I used to pay the bills. If you've come this far with my meandering memory, thank you. Stay with an old woman for a little while longer, won't you? I find it comforting, this sharing, knowing these words might reach across the miles. It certainly warms this old heart to think about where my story travels. Before I tell you what came next in that room, you need to understand how we got here. The real story didn't begin in court. It began on a cold autumn morning, 6 months earlier, the day Arthur finally let go. I was holding Arthur's hand when he passed. He'd been ill for over a year, a mean, aggressive cancer that $85 million couldn't buy off. In the last few minutes, he'd squeezed my hand, his eyes focused and clear, a rare moment in those final weeks. Evie, he'd whispered, using the pet name he reserved for the darkest times. They are going to come for you. They think you are fragile glass, but I made sure everything is yours, my love, just like we planned. He wasn't talking about the money. He was talking about the freedom to finally be Evelyn Mitchell again, if I chose. 2 weeks later came the reading of the will. Mrs. Holloway, Arthur's longtime estate lawyer, a woman who looked like a friendly librarian but had the steel spine of a battleship, presided. Charlotte arrived first, clad in obligatory black, looking appropriately tragic and already calculating the square footage of the family's main country manor. Gregory, of course, was whispering stock prices into his phone until Mrs. Holloway cleared her throat. "To my beloved wife, Evelyn Mitchell Sterling," Mrs. Holloway read, her voice steady. "I leave my entire estate, including all properties, investments, and business holdings, valued at approximately $85 million. The silence that followed was so complete you could hear the distant city. Traffic, Charlotte's perfectly applied mascara, was suddenly challenged by a single seismic tear. "That's impossible," she choked out. "Daddy told me the majority of the liquid assets would be mine. He promised the entire Pacific Heights house." Mrs. Holloway didn't even look up. "The will is exceedingly clear, Mrs. Brooks. Your father left you personal items of sentimental value and a fully funded $10 million endowment, the Sterling Family Foundation, to be managed by you, with the understanding that every dollar must be actively raised and distributed to local charities before you are entitled to any portion of the principal." The foundation. Arthur hadn't punished her. He'd given her a job. He'd forced her to work with the money, to learn responsibility, something she had never done. Gregory exploded. "This has to be a mistake!" "Evelyn doesn't understand the first thing about managing a portfolio, let alone $85 million. She'll be bled dry by some investment shark within a year. We need to see those documents." "There is no mistake, Mr. Brooks," Mrs. Holloway stated coolly. "Mr. Sterling updated this will 6 months ago, after consulting with several specialists. It is signed, witnessed, and fully notarized. He made his choice." The look Charlotte gave me then wasn't grief. It was raw, furious, naked greed. She saw not her mother, but a soft, easily pliable vault key. The lawsuit papers arrived 2 months later, neatly folded inside a court summons. I was sitting in my breakfast nook, having my morning tea, when the nervous young courier handed them over. They weren't claiming forgery. Arthur had been too meticulous for that. They were claiming incapacity. The main evidence centered on my management of a small test fund Arthur had set up a year prior. The Cypress Hill Fund. He'd tasked me with managing the initial $300,000, a test run to see what would happen. Gregory claimed I had ruined it by making strange, undocumented payouts and failing to provide basic accounting. The petition read like fiction. I was described as exhibiting erratic behavior, irrational financial decisions, and secretive paranoia about money. They cited the time I'd asked my neighbor's tech-savvy grandson to help me set up the new online accounting software for the Cypress Hill Fund. They documented my frustration when I couldn't remember the complicated steps for a wire transfer, a deliberate performance, of course, staged the day Gregory was visiting. I put the documents down, the tea suddenly bitter. They wanted me to be a senile victim so they could be my saviors. The afternoon before the first hearing, I finally sought out the contact Arthur had left me, folded inside an old book. It was a faded business card for the Honorable Helena Vance, Superior Court, District 4. Scrawled on the back in Arthur's spidery hand were 2 words: "She remembers." I hadn't needed the card. I'd recognized the name on the docket immediately: Sterling v. Sterling. Helena Vance, formerly Helena Albright. My toughest competitor, my best drinking buddy, and the woman who'd eventually taken the judiciary track when I took the matrimonial track. I dialed the chamber's private line. "This is Evelyn Sterling," I said. "I'd like to speak with Helena Albright." There was a pregnant pause on the line. Then the voice, sharper and colder than I remembered. "Judge Vance is not available for personal calls, Mrs. Sterling. Who may I say is calling? Tell her it's Evelyn Mitchell, and I need a professional courtesy discussion about the rules of judicial conduct for the case on her docket tomorrow." The voice on the other end became breathy. "Please hold, Mrs. Sterling." A moment later, I heard the judge's unmistakable voice, slightly breathless. "Evelyn, my God, it is you." I saw the name and thought, it can't possibly be Evelyn Mitchell, the corporate destroyer, reduced to a divorce case. But Hamilton vs. Hamilton. Your daughter's suing you? Over Arthur's estate? "It's Sterling versus Sterling now, darling," I corrected, a ghost of my old self resurfacing. "And yes, They think I've been manipulated into financial ruin by a pair of sensible shoes. They are specifically using the messy accounting of the Cypress Hill Fund as their smoking gun of incompetence. Helena let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. Incompetent! Evelyn, you once took down a Fortune 50 CEO on a technicality involving a misplaced decimal point in a Cayman Island tax filing. You practically wrote the book on exposing financial malfeasance. And they think I can't operate online banking, I sighed, the weariness genuine now. Helena, I need you to confirm, given our history, our time together at Harvard Law, our years as rival corporate prosecutors, can you ethically hear this case? We were colleagues, not sisters, Evelyn. And it's been 30 years. I am within the ethical guidelines. But why represent yourself, Evie? Your opponent is Marcus Thorne. He specializes in elder law and has a reputation for being pitiless. He's relying entirely on his own assumptions about the defendant, I murmured, staring at the shelf of annotated case law in Arthur's study. And that's his biggest mistake. I want him to commit to every single one of those assumptions. I want him to believe, unequivocally, that he is battling a confused old woman with no legal representation and no understanding of his procedure. I need him to overextend himself. You're building a trap, aren't you? Helena's voice was filled with a mixture of terror and delight. I am simply preparing my defense, Helena. The one I abandoned 30 years ago to raise my daughter. I paused. Arthur always knew this day would come. He knew the moment I stopped being mom and became the vault key, they would challenge me. Back in the courtroom, Judge Vance had finished reading Mr. Thorne's opening statement, which detailed the carnage of the Cypress Hill Fund. Thorne, confident and theatrical, was now cross-examining me. Mrs. Sterling, your son-in-law, Mr. Brooks, has testified that on 3 separate occasions, he offered to sit down and reconcile the Cypress Hill Fund's ledger. Is that accurate? I adopted my best bewildered gaze. Oh, Gregory, yes. He was ever so helpful. But I kept misplacing the password. All those letters and numbers, you know. It's hard to keep track when you're my age. Thorne beamed at the jury box, a small advisory one, filled with 3 neutral financial experts the judge had appointed. And yet, despite your admitted difficulty with simple digital accounting, you proceeded to make 3 enormous undocumented wire transfers from that fund, totaling nearly $150,000. Correct? Well, I did tell Arthur I'd handle it, I mumbled, fiddling with a button on my jacket. He trusted me. I'm just not sure where the money went precisely. I recall helping a few people. It's all a bit blurry now, Charlotte whispered to Gregory, a look of vindication on her face. Case closed. This was the perfect evidence of catastrophic incompetence. Your Honor, Thorne said, addressing the bench with finality. This testimony, combined with the documentary evidence of 3 large, unreceipted withdrawals, constitutes clear and convincing evidence that Mrs. Sterling lacks the basic cognitive capacity to understand the nature and consequences of her financial decisions, particularly when dealing with an $85 million portfolio. We demand the immediate appointment of a conservator. Judge Vance adjusted her glasses. Mrs. Sterling, is this your defense? That you cannot recall where $150,000 went? I straightened up, letting the confusion drain from my face, replacing it with something cold and precise. The act was over. No, Your Honor, that was merely a demonstration. I reached into my handbag and pulled out a slim, leather-bound portfolio, not the cheap plastic one they expected, but a high-grade legal binder. A demonstration of the prejudice and selective listening of the plaintiff's counsel. Mr. Thorne's case rests entirely on the assumption that because I look like a frail, confused old woman, my actions are inherently incompetent, rather than deliberate. They never once asked who received those funds. Thorne's smile faltered. Objection, Your Honor. The defendant is engaging in theatrical posturing. Overruled, Mr. Thorne, Judge Vance snapped, her eyes gleaming. Mrs. Sterling, proceed with your documentation. Thank you, Your Honor. I stood tall, the slight stoop in my posture vanishing. The 3 wire transfers Mr. Thorne mentioned were indeed made by me. The first $60,000 went to the Eastwick Veterans Education Fund to cover tuition for 2 disabled students. The second, $45,000, was a seed investment in Solaris Technologies, a startup run by a high school dropout from a disadvantaged neighborhood. And the final $50,000 was distributed to Project Safe Haven to buy temporary housing for abused women. I walked to the court clerk and handed over the binder. Inside that portfolio, Your Honor, you will find fully executed IRS 501c3 documentation for each recipient charity, a 36-page business plan and financial forecast for Solaris Technologies, and certified repayment schedules for the funds, which are designed to be paid back into the Cypress Hill Fund over 5 years, turning it into a self-sustaining microloan organization. I turned to Thorne, whose face was pale. These were not undocumented withdrawals, Mr. Thorne. They were impact investments made after weeks of due diligence. The only reason the ledger looked messy to your clients is that they are financially illiterate outside the confines of a stock ticker and never bothered to use the customized philanthropic accounting software Arthur built specifically for that fund. The courtroom was silent. Charlotte was staring at me as if I had spoken in Mandarin. Your Honor, I said, and this was the moment. I believe the court needs a clearer understanding of my background to assess the plaintiff's claim of incapacity versus my actual competency to manage complex financial affairs. I reached into the inner pocket of my tweed jacket and pulled out a laminated card. Worn smooth at the edges, my name is Evelyn Mitchell Sterling. I am a retired corporate prosecutor for the Southern District of New York. I hold a license to practice law in Massachusetts and New York, active and valid since 1978. I placed the card on the clerk's desk. My license number is 745023. Before retiring, I specialized in exposing high-level securities fraud, money laundering, and corporate embezzlement. The last major case I tried before taking early retirement to raise my daughter was the indictment of the 3 principals of the infamous Ares Group, a case that led to the recovery of $200 million in defrauded investor assets. I looked directly at Marcus Thorne, who was frozen in place. You spent the last hour arguing that I lack the capacity to understand a bank statement. You failed to conduct even a basic background check on the defendant. A simple search of the State Bar Association would have flagged my credentials. This displays a level of negligence that is frankly breathtaking, Mr. Thorne, and proves that your entire case was built on nothing but ageism and prejudice. Charlotte gasped. Mom, you never told me. I turned, my gaze piercing. You never asked, Charlotte. You asked me about ballet recital times and college applications. You asked if I remembered to pick up the dry cleaning. You never once asked about the decade before you were born. In your mind, I was born the day I married your father. A blank slate, easily written over. Thorne finally recovered, shouting, Objection! This changes nothing. 30 years out of practice. This is a deliberate manipulation to embarrass the plaintiff and obstruct justice. Obstruct justice? Judge Vance interjected, her voice dangerously calm. Mr. Thorne, you have accused a former federal prosecutor of incapacity based on 3 perfectly legal, documented, and exceptionally well-managed philanthropic investments. Are you now suggesting she is so cunning that she deliberately orchestrated years of incompetence to trick you into filing a lawsuit just for the pleasure of revealing her past? Yes, Your Honor, Thorne yelled, walking right into the center of the trap. It is evidence of severe manipulative instability. Or, the judge countered, leaning forward, it is evidence of a highly intelligent woman carefully observing who exactly would value her for herself and who would only value her for her wealth. I am inclined to think the latter. The judge called a short recess, primarily to give Mr. Thorne time to pull himself together and to allow the court staff to verify my bar credentials, which, of course, they did instantly. During the break, Gregory rushed into the hallway pulling out his phone. Charlotte, however, came straight to me. Her face was ravaged, not by greed now, but by a deep, shattering confusion. Why, Mom? Why the act? Why the Cypress Hill Fund? Why let us think you were losing it? I led her to a quiet corner. Arthur gave me that fund because he knew you were watching. I used it as a test. I wanted to see if your concern was for me, the confused old woman, or for the money you thought I was wasting. You didn't ask for a doctor, Charlotte. You called a lawyer. But the foundation, she whispered, referring to her $10 million inheritance. He loved me. Why force me to work? He loved you deeply, sweetheart. But he also saw how money corrupted your judgment. He gave you a chance to prove you valued service over wealth. He knew you and Gregory would tear my life apart to get his 85 million. He simply trusted me to know when and how to push back. The next day, Gregory returned with a new, younger lawyer, a viper named David Chen. Chen's strategy was exactly what I'd anticipated, doubling down on the manipulation theory. "Your Honor," Chen declared, "Mrs. Sterling's revelation is not evidence of competence. It's evidence of malice. She weaponized her vulnerability against her own daughter to cause emotional and financial distress, proving she is unfit for the complexities of modern wealth management." A fine theory. "Mr. Chen," I said, standing to address the court, "but let us return to my initial evidence. When the money is the point, the motivation is always clear." I reached into my handbag a final time. I pulled out a small metallic flash drive. "Your Honor, I have one last piece of evidence. A recording." My husband, Arthur, installed a discreet listening device in the main sitting room of the country. Manor years ago, after Gregory had a particularly nasty phone conversation about Arthur's taxes, he left the recording device's location and retrieval code in a separate sealed letter, telling me I could use the contents only if I felt I was in genuine physical or financial peril. Chen shouted, "Objection! Illegal recording! Inadmissible!" "Mr. Chen," Judge Vance cut in, exasperated. "Massachusetts is a one-party consent state. The conversation was recorded in the owner's home with the owner's prior knowledge and consent. It is admissible. Play the recording, Mrs. Sterling." The clerk adjusted the audio equipment. The courtroom fell utterly silent. Then, Gregory's voice boomed through the speakers, talking to Charlotte, just weeks before the lawsuit. "Look, he left everything to her. 85 million. We can't let this old woman blow it on her silly little causes. She thinks she's some kind of social justice warrior now, playing around with those small funds. We have to file, Char. Get her declared incompetent. Once the court agrees, she gets a small allowance. We get the principal. It's all legal. And frankly, the only thing the old bat is competent enough to do is sign the transfer papers." A collective gasp went through the courtroom. Gregory buried his head in his hands. Charlotte was staring at him, her face a mask of horror. The judge leaned back, closing her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, they were glacial. "Mr. Chen, I have listened to the full scope of Mrs. Sterling's testimony. I have verified her credentials, and I have just listened to your client's stated motivation for filing this petition. This court finds that the petition of incompetence and fraud filed by Charlotte Brooks and Gregory Brooks is entirely without merit. Mrs. Evelyn Sterling has demonstrated not only exceptional mental acuity, but also a highly organized, professional level of financial and legal management. Furthermore, the petition constitutes a clear case of judicial harassment and elder abuse for the purposes of illicit gain. She brought the gavel down with a bone-jarring finality. Case dismissed. All costs to be borne by the plaintiffs. Gregory exploded, but Charlotte did not move. As the judge rose and left the bench, Charlotte finally looked at me, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry, Mom," she whispered. I nodded, the triumph already fading, replaced by a deep, hollow sadness. "I know you are, sweetheart, but sorry isn't enough. Respect, honesty, and trust are the currency we deal in now, and you need to learn how to earn them." 6 months have passed since then. I sold the country manor, too many ghosts, too many uncomfortable memories, and moved into a lovely old stone cottage by the coast, just Arthur and I, the way it used to feel. I donated $40 million of Arthur's estate to a new national organization, the Mitchell-Sterling Elder Justice League. It's dedicated to providing free, high-powered legal defense to vulnerable seniors facing financial exploitation by their own families. I've started consulting on the cases myself. It seems I wasn't quite ready to retire Evelyn Mitchell after all. Charlotte calls sometimes. We are speaking, yes, but the relationship is fragile, rebuilt on new terms. Gregory is not part of the picture, thankfully. Charlotte is now running her Sterling Family Foundation, forced to do the hard work of raising and distributing the $10 million Arthur left her. learning the value of $1 the only way she ever would, by having to account for every single penny. Arthur didn't give me $85 million just for comfort. He gave it to me for power. He knew I would use it as a weapon against the people who would disrespect and undervalue me, even if they were our own flesh and blood. They thought I was a fragile old woman who had wandered into an inheritance. They were right that I was old. But they forgot one crucial thing. A lifetime of pretense doesn't make you weak. It just means you have a much, much sharper knife waiting in the shadows. And that, my dears, is a lesson they won't soon forget. The lioness always knows how to protect her territory. The end.